My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 62 years old and a retired nurse who spent her entire life serving a small community in Colorado. I thought retirement would finally bring me peace, surrounded by my son Daniel and my little grandchild, but everything collapsed the day my daughter-in-law Melissa slammed the door in my face and kicked me out of the very house I helped build. In that moment, my heart shattered. I didn't just lose a roof over my head, I lost respect for my own family, but I didn't stay broken for long. I stood up, and I made a choice. I would come back, and this time, no one would silence me. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. Because my story isn't just about a mother being cast aside. It's about a comeback that left everyone stunned. When I returned, I didn't walk in alone. I brought someone with me, someone Melissa never expected, and when the truth came out, her face turned pale. You won't believe what happened next. I never thought I would be standing on my own front porch with a suitcase in my hand, staring at a locked door, but that was the reality Melissa forced on me. Just a week earlier, I had been rocking my grandson to sleep in the living room, humming the same lullaby I once sang to Daniel. Now, that same living room was off limits to me. The sound of Melissa's voice still rang in my ears, sharp and cold, telling me I didn't belong there anymore. For years, I believed that if I kept my head down, stayed kind, and avoided conflict, everything would be fine. Daniel loved Melissa, and I wanted to support their marriage. I cooked meals, helped clean the house, and even put money toward renovations when Daniel lost his job during the recession. That house wasn't just a building, it was a piece of my heart. But to Melissa, I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a reminder of the sacrifices she never respected. The tension had been building for months. Melissa had a way of looking at me like I was a guest who overstayed her welcome. She criticized how I held the baby, how I folded laundry, even how I spoke to neighbors. I brushed it off because I didn't want to burden Daniel. He worked long hours, and the last thing I wanted was to make him choose between his mother and his wife. But deep down, I could feel the resentment growing, like a storm waiting to break. That storm finally came the night Melissa exploded. It started with something small. I had cooked dinner chicken pot pie, Daniel's favorite. When Melissa walked in, she wrinkled her nose and said she had ordered takeout. I suggested we save the takeout for tomorrow and enjoy the homemade meal tonight. Her eyes narrowed, and in that instant, all the politeness she had worn like a mask disappeared. She yelled that I was undermining her, that I thought I ran her house. My house. I wanted to correct, but the words stuck in my throat. She accused me of turning Daniel against her, of smothering the baby, of being a burden they never asked for. Daniel wasn't home to hear it. It was just me, Melissa, and a baby who started crying as her voice grew louder. And then she pointed to the door. She told me to get out, not tomorrow, not next week now. I begged her to calm down, to think about Daniel, to think about the baby, but her mind was made up. She grabbed my suitcase from the closet already packed, as if she had been waiting for this moment, and shoved it into my hands. I stumbled onto the porch, stunned and humiliated. While she slammed the door behind me, the lock clicked, and with it, so did the end of everything I thought I knew about family. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled of stale smoke, and the thin mattress dug into my back. But I barely noticed. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word, trying to make sense of how I had become the villain in Melissa's story. I cried until my chest ached, but beneath the grief, something else began to stir anger. Melissa thought she could erase me. She thought she could strip me of dignity and cast me aside like I didn't matter. But she underestimated me. I had spent my entire career fighting for patients who couldn't fight for themselves, standing up to doctors who dismissed their pain, battling insurance companies who wanted to deny care. I wasn't about to let one bitter woman take away my place in my son's life or my grandson's. Still, I needed to be smart. Marching back into that house the next morning would only prove Melissa right, that I was desperate, clinging, unable to let go. No, if I was going to return, I had to do it on my terms. And I had to make sure Melissa understood she could not control me, not with cruelty, not with manipulation. The next day, I called Daniel. He didn't pick up. Instead, Melissa answered, her voice dripping with satisfaction. She told me Daniel agreed it was best if I stayed away, that they needed space as a family. My heart broke hearing her speak for him, knowing he was either too afraid or too blinded to intervene. When she hung up, I realized the battle wasn't just between me and Melissa. It was about the hold she had over my son, the way she twisted every situation to make herself the victim. And then came the twist of the knife. 2 days later, I received a notice in the mail Melissa had sold the small piece of land I had set aside for my grandson's future. That land wasn't just property. It was the last gift from my late husband, something we had planned to pass down, and now, without so much as a conversation, it was gone. My grief turned into fury. Melissa thought she had won, but she had no idea who she was dealing with, because I wasn't done, not even close. That was the night I picked up the phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who owed me a favor, someone who could turn the tables in ways Melissa could never imagine. When that call ended, I knew one thing for certain the next time I walked into that house. Melissa wouldn't be the one in control. The man I called that night was Richard Lawson, an attorney I had once worked alongside during my nursing years. Back then, I was a head nurse at the county hospital, and Richard was a young lawyer handling malpractice cases. One late night, a scared single mother came into the ER with her injured child. The hospital tried to deny her treatment because of insurance complications, but I refused to let them send her away. I pulled Richard into the case, and together, we made sure that child was treated and the mother got justice. Richard never forgot it. So when he answered my call decades later, his voice warm with recognition, I felt the tiniest flicker of hope. I told him everything Melissa throwing me out. Daniel's silence. The land that had been sold behind my back. There was a pause on the line. Then Richard said, "Margaret, you did me a kindness once that changed my life. Now it's my turn to return the favor." The next morning, we met at a small diner in town. Richard still had the same sharp eyes, though his hair had gone gray at the temples. Over coffee, he explained that if the land had truly been sold without my consent, there might be legal grounds to challenge it. My husband's name had been on the deed, and when he passed, ownership transferred to me. Melissa had no right to touch it. Hearing those words felt like a lifeline being thrown to someone drowning. But Richard warned me to be patient. If we go at this recklessly, Melissa will twist the story. She'll paint you as a bitter old woman trying to sabotage her son's marriage. We need to gather evidence. Get everything documented. When the truth comes out, it needs to be undeniable. I nodded, but my heart burned with impatience. Each day away from my grandson felt like an eternity. Still, I knew Richard was right. Melissa was cunning. She had already turned Daniel against me, convinced him I was meddling, suffocating. If I made one wrong move, I might lose him forever. Meanwhile, I tried reaching Daniel again. This time, he answered. His voice was tired, flat. "Mom, maybe it's best if you take a break. Melissa's under a lot of stress, and we just need space." I wanted to scream that he was blind, that his wife had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, but I swallowed the words. Instead, I asked, "And what about the land? The piece your father left for your son?" There was silence on the line. Daniel hadn't even known. I could hear the confusion in his voice, the seeds of doubt starting to crack through. Melissa had kept it from him. That moment gave me strength. Maybe Melissa had influence over Daniel, but she didn't control everything. Not yet. A week later, Richard called me with news. He had pulled the records. The land sale was legitimate on paper, but the signature used was a forgery. My name, scrawled in ink, but not my hand. Melissa had committed fraud. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a crime. I sat in Richard's office, staring at the documents. My pulse pounded in my ears. Part of me wanted to march straight to Daniel with the papers, to shove the truth in his face. But Richard leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Not yet. Let her think she's safe. Let her dig herself deeper. When we bring this out, it'll be public. She won't be able to explain her way out." The waiting was torture. I rented a small apartment above a hardware store in town, lonely and bare, but it gave me space to think. Each night, I replayed memories of Melissa, the fake smile at holidays, the way she corrected me in front of neighbors, the constant insinuation that I didn't belong, and each night, my resolve hardened. Melissa thought she had stripped me of everything, but what she didn't know was that I had something she couldn't take away my will to fight back. One afternoon, I went grocery shopping and ran into an old friend from church, Mrs. Porter. She asked why she hadn't seen me with Daniel and the baby lately. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile, just giving them space. I said, her eyes softened, but she leaned closer and whispered, "You're stronger than you think. Margaret, don't let anyone write you out of your own family." Her words stuck with me. A few days later, Richard suggested we start preparing a strategy. If Melissa forged my signature once, she might have left other trails. He urged me to search through my belongings, old files, anything she might have tampered with. That night, I dug through a box of papers I had salvaged from the house. In the bottom, I found a letter addressed to me from the bank months old, unopened. It warned about unusual activity regarding my accounts. My hands shook as I read it. Melissa hadn't just touched the land. She had been meddling in my finances, too. The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't just a power struggle over family. It was theft. It was betrayal on a level I hadn't dared to imagine. And if I didn't stop her, she would bleed me dry until nothing was left. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror. The lines on my face told the story of years spent caring for others, but behind my eyes, a fire burned brighter than ever. Melissa had started this war, but I was going to finish it. And when the truth came out, she wouldn't just lose her mask, she would lose everything she had tried to steal. The discovery of that letter changed everything. It was no longer just about Melissa's cruelty or her controlling behavior, it was about survival. She wasn't satisfied with humiliating me and forcing me out of the home. She wanted to erase me completely, financially and emotionally. That night, I placed the letter on my small kitchen table and stared at it for hours, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. I thought back to the day I married Daniel's father, Robert. We didn't have much, but we had built everything we owned with sweat and sacrifice. That land, those savings, the little investments we scraped together, they were all meant to be a safety net for Daniel and for his children. Robert worked overtime shifts at the mill, while I worked long nights at the hospital. All so we could leave something behind. And now Melissa had her claws in it, selling off pieces of Robert's legacy like it was hers to squander. The next morning, I marched into Richard's office with the letter in hand. He skimmed through it, his jaw tightening with every line. "This is worse than I thought." He said, "If she's been tampering with your finances, this could open the door to criminal charges." The word criminal echoed in my ears. I wasn't someone who thought about courts or charges or public scandals, but suddenly, I realized that Melissa's game had crossed into dangerous territory. If I stayed silent, I'd lose everything. But if I fought back, the truth could ruin her and possibly Daniel's marriage. Richard looked me square in the eyes. "Margaret, you need to decide how far you're willing to go, because once we pull this thread, the whole sweater unravels." I didn't answer right away. My heart was torn. Daniel loved Melissa, blind as he was to her cruelty. What would happen when he discovered what she had done? Would he blame me for destroying his marriage, or would he finally see who she really was? Later that week, I decided to test the waters with Daniel. I called him and asked to meet. He agreed reluctantly, his voice tired, like he was already bracing for conflict. We met at a quiet cafe near his office. When he walked in, my chest ached at the sight of him. He looked older, worn down, like the weight of Melissa's control was slowly crushing him. I tried to keep my tone gentle. "Daniel, have you noticed anything unusual with your accounts or with the land your father left behind?" He frowned, confused. "Melissa handles most of that. She said everything was fine." I slid the bank letter across the table. He read it quickly, his brows knitting together. I could see doubt flickering in his eyes. The first crack in the wall Melissa had built around him, but then, almost immediately, he pushed the paper back and shook his head. "Mom, Melissa wouldn't do this. You've always had issues with her. Maybe you're just reading too much into things." My throat tightened. He wanted so badly to believe his wife. I saw it in his face, the need to protect his marriage, even if it meant dismissing his own mother. I swallowed the pain and didn't argue. Not yet. That night, lying awake in my small apartment. I realized something painful but clear. Daniel wouldn't believe me until Melissa was exposed beyond denial. Words wouldn't convince him. Only undeniable evidence, laid out for the world to see, would break her hold on him. So I started gathering everything I could: receipts, letters, notes I had kept over the years. I remembered a time when Melissa had asked me to sign a delivery slip for a contractor. At the time, I didn't think twice about it, but now I wondered if she had slipped other papers under my nose, slowly building her scheme. I searched every box of documents I had salvaged and found copies of contracts that bore my name, signatures that didn't match mine. The more I dug, the angrier I became. How long had she been planning this? How many times had I looked into her smiling face at Sunday dinners, never realizing she was sharpening a knife behind her back? One evening, I visited the cemetery where Robert was buried. I sat by his grave and whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner, but I promise you I won't let her destroy what we built. I'll fight for our son, for our grandson, and for your memory." The wind rustled through the trees as if answering me, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everything Robert and I had sacrificed for. The next day, Richard arranged for a handwriting expert to review the documents. When the results came back, it was undeniable at least 3 different papers had forged signatures. My stomach churned with both relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't imagining things. Dread because this meant war. Richard leaned back in his chair. "With this, we can take her to court, but I know that's not what you ultimately want. You want your family back." He was right. More than revenge. I wanted Daniel to open his eyes. I wanted my grandson to grow up knowing his grandmother hadn't been cast aside like trash. But I also wanted Melissa to face consequences. Not just for me, but for the family she had tried to tear apart. So I told Richard, "Let's move carefully. I don't want to just win a case. I want to win my son back." He nodded. "Then we'll make sure when Melissa falls, she falls in front of everyone. No lies, no spin, no escape." That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: resolve. Melissa had drawn the battle lines, but she had no idea how strong I could be. And soon, the mask she wore so proudly would crack, and everyone, including Daniel, would see the truth. The first real turning point came on a chilly Saturday morning when I spotted Daniel's car parked outside my apartment building. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. He hadn't visited me once since Melissa threw me out. My heart pounded as I opened the door, bracing myself for what might come. Daniel stood there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I stepped aside and let him in. The apartment was bare and smelled faintly of coffee. He sat on the couch, looking uncomfortable, as if the plainness of my life outside his home unsettled him. Finally, he spoke. "Melissa told me you were trying to turn people against her, that you've been digging through old papers, hiring lawyers. What's going on?" I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Daniel, I'm not trying to hurt your wife. I'm trying to protect what your father left for this family. Look at this." I handed him the copies of the contracts with the forged signatures. His eyes scanned the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. "Mom, these don't look right," he admitted. His voice wavered, caught between disbelief and suspicion. "But Melissa said—" He stopped himself, as though repeating her excuses would sound hollow even to his own ears. I leaned forward, my voice trembling but firm. "Daniel, you know me. I would never lie to you about something this serious. Your father worked his whole life to leave us something, and it's being stolen. If you don't believe me, then believe the evidence. This isn't just between Melissa and me anymore. This is about the future of your own son." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn, for years. I had watched Melissa plant seeds of doubt, twisting every story so that I looked controlling, meddling, overbearing. But in that moment, I saw the crack widen in Daniel's loyalty. Still, he stood and shook his head. "I need time to think." And with that, he left. After the door closed, I sank into the couch, tears spilling down my cheeks. A part of me wanted to despair he still hadn't chosen me, still hadn't broken free of Melissa's grip. But another part of me clung to the fact that he came at all, that he looked at the papers. That doubt had finally entered his heart. The following week was excruciating. Richard and I met regularly, building the case. The handwriting expert had given us undeniable proof. But Richard wanted more. We need to catch her in the act. He said, something fresh, something recent, so she can't explain it away. So we began to set a quiet trap. Richard suggested we request a meeting with Melissa under the pretense of discussing the land sale. He wanted to record her words, to see if she slipped up. I hesitated at first. Was it wrong to trick her? But then I remembered the sting of standing on my own porch with a suitcase, locked out of my son's life. And I agreed. A week later, the meeting was arranged. Richard invited Melissa to his office. Claiming he had a few loose ends to tie up about the land, I sat in the adjoining room, listening through a barely open door. My hands shook as Melissa walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She spoke with the same honeyed voice she used in public, the one neighbors and friends adored. But when Richard questioned her about the signature, the mask began to slip. Of course Margaret signed it, she insisted. She just forgets things these days. You know how the elderly can be. My stomach twisted at her words. Elderly, forgetful. She was already painting me as senile, someone unfit to be trusted. Richard pressed harder, asking why certain documents had inconsistencies. Melissa grew defensive, her voice rising. It doesn't matter, Daniel and I agreed to sell it, and Margaret would have ruined everything if we let her have control. Those words were all we needed. She had admitted the intent, even if not the act itself. Richard ended the meeting smoothly, thanking her for her time, but as soon as she left, he turned to me with a grim smile. She's digging her own grave. That night, I sat alone, replaying her words in my mind. The hurt cut deep, but beneath it burned a quiet triumph. For years, Melissa had belittled me, convinced others that I was weak, out of touch, irrelevant, but now, the evidence was stacking against her. Still, I worried about Daniel. He was caught in the middle, torn between his mother and his wife. I didn't want to destroy his marriage, but I also couldn't let Melissa destroy me. It was a cruel paradox. Protecting my son meant revealing a truth that could shatter his world. The next day, I went to see my grandson at the park. Melissa wasn't there, only Daniel. When he saw me, he hesitated but didn't turn away. The little boy's face lit up as he ran into my arms, and in that moment, I felt whole again. Daniel watched us quietly, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore, but I can't deny something feels wrong. Melissa's been different lately, secretive." I touched his arm gently. "You don't have to take my word. Daniel, just watch. The truth has a way of showing itself." As we walked back to the car, I knew the tide was turning. Melissa's hold was weakening, and the truth was inching closer to the surface. Soon, very soon, she would no longer be able to hide behind her lies. And when that day came, I would be ready. The days that followed were heavy with anticipation. Every time my phone buzzed, I wondered if it was Daniel finally choosing to believe me or Melissa finding another way to twist the story. The pressure felt like a weight on my chest, but Richard kept reminding me, "Stay patient, Margaret, the cracks are showing. We just need one more push." That push came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I received a frantic call from Mrs. Porter, the woman from church. Her voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial. "Margaret, I don't mean to stir trouble, but I overheard Melissa at the grocery store. She was bragging on the phone about making money behind Daniel's back. She said," and I quote, "He's too naive to notice where the money's coming from." I froze, gripping the receiver. Melissa wasn't just lying to Daniel about me, she was hiding things from him too, for the first time. I felt a flicker of hope that Daniel might finally see what I had seen all along. That evening, I called Richard and told him everything. He leaned back in his chair, lips pressed into a thin line. "This confirms what I suspected. She's siphoning money somehow. And if she brags openly, we'll have no trouble finding a trail. I'll hire a private investigator to dig deeper." It felt like a new chapter was opening, one where Melissa's lies couldn't keep pace with the truth. Meanwhile, Daniel called me unexpectedly the next day. His voice sounded softer, hesitant. "Mom, Melissa's been acting strange. I checked one of our joint accounts, and money's missing." When I asked her, she brushed me off. I don't know what's happening. I closed my eyes, relief and sadness mixing together. Daniel, I wish I were wrong, but you need to face the truth. She's not protecting this family, she's tearing it apart. There was silence, then a weary sigh. I need proof. Mom, if I accuse her without it, she'll say you've poisoned me against her. I promised him, you'll have proof soon. 2 weeks later, Richard called with the results of the investigators' work. Melissa had been funneling money from Daniel's accounts into a separate account under her maiden name. She had even transferred some funds overseas, which hinted at something much larger than simple greed, fraud, theft, maybe even laundering. When I saw the paperwork laid out on Richard's desk, my knees nearly gave way. This was bigger than I ever imagined. Melissa wasn't just manipulating emotions. She was committing crimes that could destroy Daniel's financial future. Richard looked at me steadily. We have her. Margaret. The question now is, how do you want this to play out? Do we take her to court directly, or do we let Daniel see it unfold in real time, so the betrayal hits where it hurts most? My instinct screamed for the second option. Melissa had humiliated me publicly, treated me like I was disposable, but I wasn't after revenge alone. I wanted Daniel to understand, without doubt, who his wife truly was. So Richard and I devised a plan. He would schedule a formal meeting at his office, inviting both Daniel and Melissa under the guise of resolving property disputes. What Melissa didn't know was that Richard would present the evidence during the meeting, forcing her to confront the truth in front of her husband. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. My mind raced with memories rocking Daniel as a baby, watching him walk across his graduation stage, holding his hand at his wedding, and then the sharp contrast standing on the porch with my suitcase, locked out of his home. Tomorrow could bring vindication, or it could shatter what little remained of our bond. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress Robert had always loved. As I looked in the mirror, I whispered, "This is for you, for us." When I arrived at Richard's office, Daniel was already there. Looking nervous but determined, Melissa swept in moments later, all confidence and charm. She kissed Daniel on the cheek and offered me a thin smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret," she said smoothly, "I hope we can finally put this nonsense to rest." Richard wasted no time. He laid out the forged documents, the handwriting analysis, the financial transfers, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. Melissa's face shifted from smug certainty to pale shock. She tried to laugh it off, to say the signatures were mine, that the accounts were family arrangements. But then Richard slid forward the investigator's report bank statements tied directly to her maiden name. Daniel's face went white. His hands trembled as he scanned the pages. "Melissa, tell me this isn't true." Melissa stammered, her voice cracking. "Daniel, I did it for us. I wanted security, options you couldn't give us." But Daniel cut her off, his voice breaking. "You forged my mother's name. You stole from me, from our son. How could you?" I watched as the walls Melissa had built around him crumbled in an instant. The betrayal hit him harder than anything I could have said. Melissa turned on me then, her eyes blazing. "This is your fault. You've poisoned him against me." I stood tall, my voice steady. "No, Melissa, you did this to yourself." The room fell silent except for the sound of Daniel's breathing, ragged and pained, for the first time in years. He looked at me not with doubt or suspicion, but with something closer to clarity, and in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. Daniel didn't speak to me for 3 days after the meeting. He didn't speak to Melissa either. I knew because I sat by my phone, waiting, and when he finally called, his voice was hollow. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't even recognize my own life anymore." I wanted to reach through the line and hold him like I did when he was a child, but all I could do was listen. He admitted Melissa had stormed out of Richard's office and spent the night at her sister's house. Daniel had stayed home with their son, pacing the halls, staring at the walls that now felt like a prison. "I believed her for so long," he whispered. "I defended her. I let her turn me against you. And the whole time, she was lying to both of us." Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced my voice to stay strong. "Daniel, it's not your fault. She knew how to twist things, how to make you doubt yourself. What matters is that you see it now." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I need to figure out what to do next. But, Mom, I want you to know you'll always have a place in my life, no matter what happens. It was the first real victory I had felt in months, but I knew the battle wasn't over. Melissa wasn't the type to admit defeat. She would fight, claw, manipulate whatever it took to keep her grip on Daniel's life and his finances. And I was right. 2 days later, Melissa showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, she stood there with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "Congratulations," she said sweetly. "You've turned Daniel against me. But do you really think you've won?" I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and let her in. If she wanted to gloat, I'd let her. Sometimes silence is stronger than words. She walked around the apartment slowly, her heels tapping against the floor. "You've always been jealous of me. Margaret, you couldn't stand that Daniel loved me more than you. So you dug up papers, dragged lawyers into our marriage, tried to destroy me." Her voice dripped with venom, but her eyes flickered with something else, fear. I met her gaze evenly. "You destroyed yourself. Melissa, all I did was bring the truth into the light." For the first time, her mask cracked, her voice rose. "Do you think Daniel will really stay with you after this? Do you think he'll forgive you for ruining his marriage?" I held my ground. "No, Melissa, he'll forgive himself for letting you fool him for so long." The words hit her like a slap. She spun on her heel and stormed out, but not before throwing one last dagger over her shoulder. "This isn't over." She was right, it wasn't. The following week, Richard filed the initial paperwork to contest the land sale and to freeze any further financial transfers. Melissa's forged documents were now part of a formal case. Richard warned me it could take months, even years, to resolve in court, but I didn't mind. The process itself was already stripping Melissa of control. Daniel, meanwhile, began confiding in me more. He admitted that Melissa had grown erratic at home, angry one moment, apologetic the next. She tried to convince him that I had masterminded everything, that I wanted to ruin their family, but Daniel wasn't buying it anymore. He asked to see more evidence, and I showed him everything. One evening, he came over with my grandson. The little boy curled up on my couch, watching cartoons, while Daniel sat across from me. His shoulders sagged, his face pale with exhaustion. "Mom, I don't know if my marriage can survive this," he confessed. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Daniel, you don't have to decide everything right now. Just focus on protecting your son. He deserves stability, honesty, love, not lies." His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since all this began, he let them fall. My strong, stoic son finally allowed himself to break. And in that moment, I knew Melissa's grip on him was gone. But Melissa wasn't done fighting. A week later, Daniel called me in a panic. "Mom, she's threatening to take our son and disappear. She said if I don't drop the case, she'll make sure I never see him again." My blood ran cold. Melissa had finally shown her true face. The last weapon in her arsenal, using her own child as leverage. I knew then that she wasn't just dangerous. She was desperate. Richard acted quickly, filing for an emergency custody hearing. Judges don't take kindly to parents who make threats like that. He assured us, "This may work in your favor." The day of the hearing, I sat beside Daniel in the courthouse. Melissa walked in, dressed immaculately, her lawyer at her side, but her eyes darted nervously, betraying the calm facade. The judge listened patiently as both sides spoke. Melissa's lawyer painted me as manipulative, claiming I was bitter and jealous. But then Richard presented the bank records, the forged documents, and the investigator's report. Piece by piece, Melissa's lies unraveled. When the judge asked Daniel if he felt his son was safe under Melissa's care, he hesitated only for a second before answering, "Not anymore." Melissa's face turned pale, her composure shattering. For the first time, she realized her lies had not only failed, but backfired. The custody order was granted in Daniel's favor, at least temporarily, until the full case could be resolved. As we walked out of the courthouse, Daniel turned to me with weary eyes. "Mom, I don't know what's going to happen next, but thank you. If you hadn't fought back, I would have lost everything without even realizing it." I squeezed his hand. "No, Daniel, we fought back together." And as the autumn sun dipped low over the courthouse steps, I knew Melissa's downfall had only just begun. The The custody hearing was only the beginning. For the first time in years, I felt like the tide was turning in my favor. But Melissa wasn't the type to surrender quietly. She had been exposed, her lies stripped bare. Yet I could see it in her eyes that day in court. She was already plotting her next move. Daniel tried to hold things together at home, but the damage was done. Melissa alternated between begging him for forgiveness and lashing out in fury. He told me one evening over the phone that she had smashed a picture frame, shattering glass across the living room floor. Then moments later was on her knees, crying and insisting she couldn't live without him. "Mom," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to deal with this anymore. She's unraveling." I ached for him, but I also knew Melissa's unraveling was her own doing. Lies are heavy things, eventually. They crush the person who carries them. Richard pressed forward with the case, the forged signatures, the siphoned money, the threats Melissa had made about taking the child. All of it painted a picture of a woman whose greed had outpaced her sense of decency. Still, he warned me that cases like this could drag on. Melissa would try every trick in the book to delay, deny, and deflect. But then something happened that neither Richard nor I could have predicted. A knock came at my apartment door one evening, and when I opened it, I found a woman standing there. She looked nervous, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "Are you Margaret Hayes?" she asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "My name is Claire," she said. "I'm Melissa's cousin." I stiffened. What could Melissa's cousin possibly want from me? Claire stepped inside, lowering her voice. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Melissa has been lying to everyone, including me. I know about the accounts. She bragged about it at family gatherings, said she had found a way to secure her future." At first, I thought she was joking, but when I heard what happened in court, I realized it wasn't a joke, it was real. My hands trembled as I listened. This was more than evidence. This was a witness, someone from Melissa's own bloodline willing to speak against her. Claire's eyes filled with guilt. I should have come forward sooner. But Melissa, she can be cruel. She made me swear to keep quiet. I thought if I stayed out of it, it wouldn't matter. But seeing how she's tearing your family apart, I can't let her get away with it anymore. I thanked her through tears. That night, I called Richard, and he nearly laughed with disbelief. "Margaret, this is the nail in the coffin. A family member turning against her. Juries eat that up. This could end her." But for me, it wasn't about ending Melissa, it was about saving Daniel, saving my grandson. The next court date arrived 2 weeks later. This time, Claire sat quietly in the back until Richard called her forward. Melissa's face drained of color the moment she saw her cousin take the stand. Claire spoke softly but clearly, recounting the times Melissa had bragged about forging papers, about handling me, about funneling money into her own account. Every word was like a dagger. Melissa tried to interrupt, shaking her head furiously, whispering harshly to her lawyer, but the judge silenced her. And for the first time, the courtroom didn't see Melissa as the polished, charming wife. They saw her for what she was, a fraud. Daniel sat beside me, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the floor. But when Claire finished her testimony, he finally looked up at Melissa. His expression was one I had never seen before. Not anger, not even sadness, just emptiness. As if whatever love he had for her had been extinguished completely. Melissa, sensing she was losing him, broke down in tears. She begged the judge to believe her, begged Daniel to understand. But the performance was hollow now. The mask was gone, and everyone could see the truth. When the session ended, Daniel walked out without a word to her. He placed a hand on my shoulder, guiding me out of the courtroom like he had when he was a boy, helping me across a busy street. Outside, he finally spoke. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not believing you sooner. For letting her treat you the way she did. You were right all along." I swallowed hard, my voice breaking. "Daniel, you don't need to apologize. You just needed to see it for yourself." He nodded slowly. "I see it now, and I don't think I can ever go back." It was the first time he admitted out loud what I had feared and hoped for, that his marriage was over. Melissa's downfall wasn't complete yet. She still had her lawyer, her excuses, her pride, but she had lost the one thing she had fought so hard to control: Daniel's faith in her. As we drove away from the courthouse, Daniel turned to me with tired eyes. "Mom, can we come stay with you for a while? just until I figure things out. Tears filled my eyes as I nodded. My apartment was small, cramped, hardly the home Daniel deserved, but for the first time since Melissa slammed that door in my sitting, I felt like I had my family back. That night, as I tucked my grandson into bed in my little apartment, he looked up at me sleepily and whispered, "Grandma, I like it here." And for the first time in months, my heart felt whole again. But deep down, I knew Melissa wasn't finished yet. People like her never walked away quietly. The storm might have passed for now, but another was coming, and when it hit, I would be ready. Having Daniel and my grandson under my roof felt like a miracle. The apartment was small, barely 2 bedrooms, but it was filled with laughter again. My grandson ran through the hallways, his giggles echoing off the walls, while Daniel sat at the kitchen table with me at night, sipping coffee and finally speaking openly. For the first time in months, I felt like I had my family back. But in the back of my mind, I knew this peace was fragile. Melissa was quiet, too quiet, and silence from her was never a good sign. Richard warned me not to let my guard down. She's desperate, Margaret. People like Melissa don't fade away, they fight harder when they're cornered. He was right. 2 weeks later, Melissa struck again. This time, not with lawyers or lies, but with venom. One evening, I came home from work at the community clinic, and there was a letter taped to my apartment door. My hands shook as I tore it open. It was a typed note, no signature, but I knew her voice in the words. "You think you've won, but you don't know what I have left. Enjoy your time with Daniel, and the boy, it won't last." I sank into the couch, clutching the letter. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. When I showed it to Richard, he frowned. "This borders on harassment. We'll document it. Keep every note, every call. Judges hate this kind of behavior. It'll only make your case stronger." But Daniel was furious. "She's lost her mind. Mom, if she thinks she can scare us, she's wrong." I placed my hand on his. "Daniel, anger won't help. We need to be smarter than her." For a while, life carried on in an uneasy rhythm. Daniel started looking for a new place for him and his son, somewhere stable and safe. My grandson flourished in my care, laughing more than I'd seen in months. But the shadow of Melissa lingered, like a storm cloud always on the horizon. The breaking point came at my grandson's school. I had gone to pick him up one afternoon when I saw Melissa standing near the playground fence. She wasn't supposed to be there. The custody order made it clear that her access was limited. When our eyes met, she smiled a slow, bitter smile that chilled me to the bone. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, watching, until the teacher led my grandson out to me. That night, Daniel confronted her over the phone. I could hear her screaming through the receiver, her voice high and frantic. "You can't keep my son from me. You and your mother are destroying my life." Daniel's voice was steady but sharp. "You destroyed your own life. Melissa, don't you dare show up at his school again." After he hung up, he leaned against the wall, rubbing his face. "Mom, I don't know how much more of this I can take." I wanted to tell him it would all be over soon, but I didn't know that for sure. Melissa was unpredictable, and people like her could be dangerous when cornered. A week later, Richard called with news. The judge has agreed to an expedited hearing, given her threats, the forged documents, and now the harassment. We have a strong chance at securing permanent custody for Daniel. Relief washed over me, but I knew Melissa wouldn't take it lying down. Sure enough, on the morning of the hearing, she arrived in court dressed like a grieving widow, black dress, pearls, tissues in hand. She wept openly before the judge, claiming she was being alienated from her son by a bitter mother-in-law. She painted herself as the victim, claiming Daniel was under my control. For a moment, I worried. Her performance was convincing too, convincing. But then Richard rose with calm precision. He laid out the evidence, the forged documents, the siphoned money, the threatening note, and then, to seal it, he called Claire back to the stand. Melissa's cousin testified again, her voice steady, her words clear. She described Melissa's schemes in detail, the bragging, the lies, the cruelty. Every word drove another nail into Melissa's story. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Hayes," he said to Melissa, "you have demonstrated a troubling pattern of dishonesty and manipulation. This court does not take lightly the act of forging signatures, siphoning funds, and threatening the other parent. until further notice. Custody will remain with Mr. Hayes." Melissa let out a strangled cry. She turned to Daniel, tears streaming down her face. "You'll regret this, both of you." Daniel didn't flinch. He simply gathered his papers and walked out of the courtroom with me and his son. For the first time, he wasn't looking back. That evening, we sat together in my apartment, the three of us sharing a quiet meal. My grandson chattered happily about school, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. Daniel looked at me across the table, his eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "Mom," he said softly, "you saved us. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." I reached for his hand and squeezed it. "You don't need to repay me. Daniel, just live honestly, protect your son. That's all I've ever wanted." For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Melissa's war wasn't over, not entirely, but she had lost her power. And as I watched Daniel tuck his son into bed that night, I knew one thing for certain, no matter what Melissa tried next. She could never take this from me again. But deep in my heart, I also knew Melissa wasn't gone, and people like her didn't walk away quietly. The final storm was still coming. For a short while, life settled into something that almost resembled normal. Daniel found a modest rental house not far from my apartment, and he and my grandson began to rebuild their lives. I visited often, cooking meals, helping with schoolwork, and filling the silence of their home with warmth. It felt like the family I thought I'd lost was slowly returning to me. But with Melissa, peace was always an illusion. She hadn't accepted defeat. She never would. The first sign came one evening when Daniel received a call from an unknown number. He didn't answer at first, but the same number rang 3 more times. Finally, he picked up. It was Melissa. Her voice was trembling, desperate. "Daniel, please. You don't understand. They've twisted everything. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Just let me explain." Daniel put the phone on speaker so I could hear. His voice was calm, but cold. "Melissa, you lied. You forged my mother's name. You stole from us. There's nothing left to explain." Melissa's tone sharpened. "If you take this away from me, you'll regret it. I'll make sure the whole town knows what kind of man you are. I'll ruin you. Daniel." He ended the call without another word, his face pale with fury. For the rest of the night, he paced the living room, his hands shaking. "Mom, she's unhinged. I think she's going to do something reckless." I placed a hand on his arm, steadying him. "She already has. And she's running out of weapons. That's when people like her are the most dangerous." Richard confirmed my fears the next morning. He had received notice that Melissa's lawyer had filed an emergency petition, claiming Daniel was mentally unstable and unfit to raise his son. It was a desperate, baseless move, but one that forced us back into court. The hearing was tense. Melissa's lawyer painted a picture of Daniel as an unfit father, emotionally unstable, manipulated by his overbearing mother. I sat in that courtroom, my stomach in knots, as they tried to drag my name through the mud. But then Richard rose, calmly, methodically. He dismantled their claims. He produced Daniel's work records, testimony from neighbors and teachers who praised Daniel's devotion as a father, and the mountain of evidence against Melissa. Piece by piece, the false narrative unraveled until it lay in tatters at her feet. The judge's ruling was swift. "Mrs. Hayes, your accusations are not only unsupported, but appear to be retaliatory. This court will not entertain further attempts to weaponize custody proceedings in this manner. Consider this your final warning." Melissa's face turned ashen. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for an ally, but there were none left. Even her own cousin sat silently in the back, refusing to meet her gaze. Afterward, Daniel hugged me tightly outside the courthouse. "Mom, I don't know how much more of this I can handle, but I know one thing: I'm done letting her control me. She can't take my son, and she can't take you away from me again." For the first time, I saw resolve in his eyes. Not just the boy I had raised, but the man his father would have been proud of. Still, Melissa wasn't finished. 2 nights later, Daniel called me in a panic. "Mom, she showed up at the house. She was pounding on the door, screaming, demanding to see our son. I had to call the police." I rushed over, my heart racing. When I arrived, 2 officers were still parked outside. Melissa was gone, but the damage was clear: shattered flower pots on the porch, a broken picture frame she had hurled against the wall outside. The officer spoke to Daniel firmly. If she comes back, call us immediately, given her history. We recommend filing for a restraining order. Daniel agreed. And the next morning, Richard filed the paperwork. Melissa was legally barred from coming near Daniel, his son, or me. On paper, it was protection, but in reality, it felt like a flimsy shield against a storm. That evening, as I sat with Daniel in his living room, he slumped into the couch, exhausted. Mom, how did I not see it all those years? She was smiling to my face while stabbing us in the back. I squeezed his hand. Because you loved her. Love blinds us sometimes, but now your eyes are open, and once they are, they never close again. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. I just want to move forward, for my son, for you, for me. But even as we sat there, the weight of relief between us, I knew Melissa wasn't going to vanish quietly. She had lost her grip on Daniel, her access to the money, her control of the narrative. All she had left was rage, and rage can be dangerous. And I was right. Late one night, as I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I found another letter slid under my door. No signature, no envelope, just bold. Angry handwriting scrawled across the page. You may think you've beaten me, but I'm not done. Watch your back. I sank into a chair, the paper trembling in my hands. Melissa had lost the courts, lost Daniel, lost her mask of respectability, but she still had spite. And spite, when cornered, can turn into something far darker. As I sat there, staring at the threatening words, I realized this battle wasn't just about property or custody anymore. It was about survival. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the final confrontation with Melissa was coming. The letter under my door kept me awake that night. I sat in the dark, the words echoing in my mind, "Watch your back." It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a warning that Melissa was teetering on the edge of something reckless, something dangerous. By morning, I decided to show the note to Richard. His face tightened as he read it. This is no longer just a custody dispute or a financial case. He said firmly, this borders on criminal harassment. We'll add it to the restraining order file. But Margaret, you and Daniel both need to be extra careful now. I nodded, but inside, I felt the weight of fear pressing down on me. I had faced so much already, being thrown out of my own family, losing my home, fighting in court, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that even the forged papers hadn't. Daniel was furious when I told him, "That's it, Mom, I'm installing cameras around the house. If she so much as drives by, we'll know," true to his word. By evening, there were security cameras on every corner of his little rental home. My grandson watched curiously as his father set them up, unaware that the cheerful devices were there to protect him from his own mother. For a few days, nothing happened. I almost let myself believe Melissa had finally burned out, that the weight of her lies and the court rulings had finally broken her spirit. But Melissa was never the type to disappear quietly. It was a Wednesday evening when Daniel called me, his voice sharp with panic. "Mom, you need to come over right now. Something's happened." I rushed to his house, my heart pounding the whole way. When I arrived, Daniel was standing in the driveway with 2 police officers. His face was pale, his hands trembling. He held up his phone and showed me the footage from the security cameras. There she was, Melissa, creeping up to the house in the middle of the night, trying to peer into the windows. At one point, she picked up a rock, as if she was about to smash the glass, before throwing it aside and walking off. The officer spoke to Daniel gravely. "Mr. Hayes, this is a clear violation of the restraining order. We'll be filing charges. If she comes back, call us immediately. We'll take her in." I stood there, frozen, watching the footage again and again. The woman who had once smiled at me across the dinner table, who had promised to love my son, was now reduced to a shadow lurking outside his home, threatening the very family she once claimed to protect. Later that night, after the police left, Daniel slumped into the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, how did it come to this? I married her because I thought she was my partner, my safe place, and now she's the biggest danger in our lives." I sat beside him and took his hand, because sometimes the people who smile the brightest are hiding the darkest secrets. You couldn't have known. What matters now is that you see her clearly. He looked at me, His eyes weary his eyes weary but resolute. I want to end this, Mom. Not just in court, not just with papers. I want her out of our lives for good. The next day, Richard filed a motion to have Melissa held in contempt of court. The evidence was undeniable. Melissa was summoned to appear before the judge again. And this time, her charm was gone. She looked disheveled, her hair unkempt, her eyes wild. She tried to deny the footage, claiming it was doctored, but the judge wasn't buying it. Mrs. Hayes, the judge said sternly, you are in violation of a direct court order. This behavior is dangerous and unacceptable. Until further notice, you are barred from any contact with Mr. Hayes, his child, or his mother. Any further violation will result in immediate jail time. Melissa's face turned white. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but the bailiff's glare silenced her. As we left the courtroom, Daniel let out a long breath. Maybe now she'll finally stop. But I wasn't convinced. People like Melissa didn't stop until they had nothing left to fight with. And I feared she still had something: anger, spite, desperation that could drive her to one last act. That night, as I tucked my grandson into bed at my apartment, he looked up at me and whispered, "Grandma, is Mommy mad at us?" The question pierced my heart. I kissed his forehead and said softly, "No, sweetheart, Mommy is just confused right now, but you are safe. You are loved. That's what matters." When he drifted off to sleep, I sat by the window, staring out into the night. Somewhere out there, Melissa was stewing, her lies unraveling, her world collapsing, and I knew deep in my bones that the final confrontation was coming. The courts had taken away her money, her reputation, her custody, but Melissa still had her rage, and rage, when it's all that's left, can be the most dangerous weapon of all. The days after the contempt hearing felt eerily calm, too calm. Daniel tried to believe it was over, that Melissa had finally been scared straight by the judge's stern warning. He even began making plans for the future, enrolling my grandson in soccer, fixing up the little rental house, and slowly finding his rhythm as a single father. But I couldn't shake the unease. Melissa had lost everything: her money, her reputation, her marriage, and now her son. People like her didn't just accept defeat. They looked for one last card to play, one final way to strike back. That card revealed itself late on a Saturday night. Daniel and I were sitting in his living room, watching an old movie while my grandson slept upstairs. The knock on the door came suddenly, sharp and insistent. Daniel frowned, checking the clock. It was almost midnight. He opened the door cautiously, and there she was, Melissa. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot. She wore no makeup, and her hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. "Daniel," she whispered hoarsely, "please, just hear me out." Daniel stiffened. "You're not supposed to be here. You're violating the order." But Melissa ignored him. She pushed past him into the living room, her eyes darting around until they landed on me. The hatred in her stare was unmistakable. "You," she spat. "You ruined everything. You turned him against me." I stood slowly, keeping my voice steady. "Melissa, you did that yourself. You need to leave before you make this worse." Her laugh was bitter, hollow, worse. How could it get worse? I've lost my husband, my son, my future. Do you know what that feels like? Daniel's voice was firm. "You did this, Melissa, not Mom, not the courts, you." She turned on him, her voice rising. "I loved you. Daniel, I gave you everything, and you repaid me by siding with her. With her!" She jabbed a finger toward me, her eyes wild. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Daniel reached for his phone, whispering to me, "Call the police." But Melissa saw the movement and lunged toward him, knocking the phone out of his hand. For a moment, chaos erupted. My heart pounded as Daniel struggled to push her back, his voice shaking with anger. I rushed forward, scooping up the phone and dialing 911 with trembling fingers. Melissa collapsed onto the floor then, sobbing loudly. I didn't mean it. She wailed. "I just wanted my family back. Please, Daniel, please don't let them take my son away from me." The operator on the line told me officers were on their way. I relayed the address, my voice cracking, while Daniel kept his distance from her, his face etched with pain. When the police arrived, Melissa tried to charm them, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. that she just wanted to talk. But the restraining order was clear. She was handcuffed and led out of the house, still crying, still pleading with Daniel to forgive her. My grandson woke up during the commotion, rubbing his sleepy eyes as he watched from the stairs. "Daddy, what's happening?" he whispered. Daniel gathered him in his arms, his voice breaking. "Nothing you need to worry about. Buddy, you're safe." But I could see the devastation in his eyes. Watching his wife hauled away in handcuffs wasn't a victory, it was a heartbreak. Later, when the house was quiet again, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "Mom," he said softly, "I loved her once. I thought she was my forever. How do I reconcile that with this?" I sat beside him, resting my hand on his back. "You remember that love was real for you, Daniel, but it doesn't excuse what she became. People change, and sometimes the hardest thing we can do is accept that the person we loved isn't the person standing in front of us anymore." He nodded slowly, tears streaking his face. "I hate her for what she's done, but I hate myself more for letting it get this far." I gripped his hand. "Don't carry her sins on your shoulders. She made her choices. You're making yours now to protect your son, to rebuild your life. That's what matters." Melissa was charged that night with violating the restraining order and resisting arrest. Richard told us the case against her had only grown stronger. "This may be the end," he said grimly. "Judges don't look kindly on repeat offenders. She's digging her own grave." But even as I heard those words, I knew the truth. Melissa wasn't done until the very last shred of control slipped from her hands. And something in the way she had looked at me before the police took her away, the fire in her eyes, the promise of vengeance, told me she still had one last move left. As I lay awake that night, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I knew the storm wasn't over. Melissa was like a cornered animal now, dangerous and unpredictable. And when she came back, and I knew she would, it wouldn't be with words or papers. It would be with something far darker. Melissa's arrest should have been the end of it. The restraining order was ironclad. The charges were serious. For a brief moment, Daniel and I let ourselves believe we could finally breathe. My grandson played outside without glancing nervously at the street. Daniel even started talking about going back to school part-time to finish the degree he'd put off when he married Melissa. But deep down, I knew Melissa wasn't finished. A woman like her didn't go quietly, not when rage was the only thing she had left. It began with the phone calls. Unknown numbers in the middle of the night, heavy breathing on the other end before the line went dead. At first, we thought it was just prank calls, maybe telemarketers. But then Daniel's voicemail filled with messages. Melissa's voice low, venomous, unhinged. "You think you can erase me? You think you can just throw me away? Watch what happens next." Daniel played one for Richard, who immediately reported it to the police. "This is harassment," he said firmly. "She's violating every condition of her release. We'll push for immediate jail time." But even Richard's confidence didn't calm me, because Melissa's voice wasn't just angry, it was desperate, and desperation is dangerous. The breaking point came one evening when I was leaving the clinic. It was late, the parking lot empty except for my car. I walked quickly, clutching my bag. When I felt the sensation of eyes on me, I spun around, and there she was, Melissa. She stepped out of the shadows, her hair wild, her face pale. "You took everything from me, Margaret," she hissed. "Everything." My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. "Melissa, you're not supposed to be here. The police." "The police," she cut me off, laughing bitterly. "Do you think they can protect you? Do you think Daniel will always be there to hold your hand? One day he'll slip, and that's when I'll take back what's mine." I forced myself to stay calm. Though my knees threatened to buckle, "Melissa, you've already lost. Stop before you destroy yourself completely." Her smile chilled me. I have nothing left to lose. She stepped closer, and I stumbled backward, fumbling for my phone. My hands shook as I hit record. "Melissa, if you come any closer, I'll scream." For a moment, she just stared at me, breathing heavily, her fists clenched. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she turned and disappeared into the darkness. I stood frozen, my breath ragged, until I managed to get into my car and lock the doors. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing her face in the shadows, hearing her voice in my ear. The next morning, I showed Richard the recording. His jaw tightened. This changes everything. She's escalating. We'll use this in court, but, Margaret, you need to be careful. She's unpredictable now. Daniel was furious when he found out. She came after you. That's it. I'm done. I don't care what it takes. She's not going to terrorize us anymore. For the next week, we lived on edge. Daniel drove me to and from work. My grandson stayed close, never out of sight. Every creak of the house, every car that slowed on the street sent shivers down my spine. Then came the fire. It was past midnight when the smell of smoke woke me. I shot out of bed, heart hammering. As alarms blared through the apartment, flames licked up the side of the building, heat pressing against the windows. Neighbors shouted, children cried. I grabbed my grandson, wrapping him in a blanket, and we ran down the stairwell through the choking smoke. Daniel was already outside, yelling for everyone to move back. The fire department arrived quickly, dousing the flames before the whole building could go up, but the damage was done. My apartment, the place I had made into a home after Melissa kicked me out, was charred and blackened. As I stood on the curb, clutching my grandson to my chest, I knew in my bones this wasn't an accident. The next morning, investigators confirmed it. We found accelerant near the back door. One of them told me this was deliberate. Daniel's face turned white. It was her. It had to be her. But Melissa was nowhere to be found. Richard moved fast, filing emergency motions, demanding Melissa's immediate arrest. This isn't just harassment anymore, he said grimly. This is attempted arson. She could have killed you. The police issued a warrant, but for days, Melissa vanished. No calls, no sightings, just silence, the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. I slept on Daniel's couch during that time, my grandson curled beside me. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every shadow at the window made me tighten my grip on him. Daniel sat awake most nights, his eyes bloodshot, staring at the front door. If she comes near this house, he whispered, I won't let her get away with it this time. And I believed him. Melissa had crossed the line. She wasn't just trying to control anymore. She was trying to destroy. And as much as it terrified me, I knew the truth, the final showdown was coming. And when it did, only one of us was walking away whole. The days after the fire dragged on like a nightmare that wouldn't end. I sat in Daniel's living room, staring at the charred smell still clinging to my clothes, wondering how much more Melissa could take from me. She had stripped me of my home, my peace, and nearly my life. But I also knew something with chilling certainty: Melissa wasn't done. The police searched, but she stayed hidden. Friends of hers claimed they hadn't seen her. Her own cousin Claire told me Melissa had stopped answering her calls. It was like she had disappeared underground. That silence made it worse. Every night I lay awake, listening for the sound of breaking glass, for footsteps on the porch, for her whisper in the dark. Daniel was unraveling under the strain. He barely slept, pacing the house, jumping at every sound. My grandson, sensing the tension, clung to me constantly. Grandma, is Mommy coming? He asked one night, his little voice trembling. I held him close. No, sweetheart, she's not coming here again. You're safe. But inside, I wasn't sure I believed it. The storm finally broke one Saturday evening. Daniel and I were making dinner when headlights swept across the window. A car pulled into the driveway fast. Too fast. Daniel's face went white. It's her, he whispered. Before I could respond, Melissa was at the door, pounding with both fists. Daniel, open this door right now. Her voice was hoarse, hysterical. Daniel moved to block me, his body rigid with fury. Stay back. Mom, I'll handle this. But Melissa didn't wait. She started hurling things at the window's rocks, branches, anything she could grab. Glass shattered in the living room as my grandson screamed from upstairs. Mommy, his cry pierced through the chaos, and Melissa's voice rose even higher. Baby, it's me. Come to me. They're keeping us apart. I raced upstairs, scooping him into my arms as shards of glass rained on the floor below. His tiny body shook against mine, his tears soaking my shirt. It's okay, I whispered, even as my own voice trembled. I've got you. Grandma's here. Downstairs, Daniel shouted into his phone. Get the police here now. His voice cracked with desperation. Melissa's fury only escalated. She screamed Daniel's name, screamed mine, her voice breaking into sobs and curses all at once. "You can't take him from me. He's mine. You'll pay for this. All of you." Then, suddenly, the pounding stopped. Silence fell, broken only by my grandson's sobs. I crept to the top of the stairs, clutching him to my chest, my eyes straining to see through the broken glass. Melissa stood in the yard, her chest heaving, her hair wild. In her hand, something glinted under the porch light. A knife. My blood ran cold. Daniel froze, his phone still pressed to his ear. "She's got a weapon," he told the operator, his voice low but sharp. "Send them faster, please." Melissa raised the knife, pointing it toward the house. "If I can't have him, no one can," she screamed. I felt my knees weaken. This wasn't just rage anymore. This was dangerous, unhinged. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady but loud enough to carry, "Melissa, listen to me. Put it down. This isn't the way." Her eyes darted between him and the shattered window, wild with fury and grief. "You don't get to tell me what to do. You ruined my life. Both of you." She gestured toward me with the knife, her face twisted with hate. I tightened my hold on my grandson, whispering into his hair, "Close your eyes. Baby, don't look." The wail of sirens in the distance cut through the tension, growing louder by the second. Melissa turned her head, her expression flickering with panic. For a moment, I saw the mask slip fear, desperation, the realization of what she had done. But instead of dropping the knife, she bolted. She sprinted across the yard and into the darkness, vanishing just as the police cars screeched into the driveway. Officers swarmed the property, their flashlights cutting through the night. Daniel ran to meet them, his words spilling out in frantic bursts. She had a knife. She threatened us. She tried to break in. I stayed upstairs, rocking my grandson, my body shaking so violently I thought I might drop him. He clung to me, whispering, "Grandma, I'm scared." "So am I, sweetheart," I whispered back, tears streaming down my face. "So am I." The officers searched the area, but Melissa was gone. They promised to canvass the neighborhood, to track her down. But I knew Melissa. She was cunning when she wanted to be. She'd find a way to disappear until she was ready to strike again. That night, as I lay on the couch beside my grandson, I stared at the cracks in the ceiling and thought about how far we'd come. From being thrown out of my own home to this hiding from a woman who once sat at our dinner table like family. I should have felt broken, defeated, but instead, a fire burned in me. She had taken my home, tried to take my son, and now threatened the safety of my grandson. Enough was enough. Melissa thought she was the storm, unpredictable and destructive, but she forgot something important. I had weathered storms all my life: loss, betrayal, heartbreak, and every time, I came out stronger. This time would be no different. Because if Melissa wanted a final war, she was going to get one. And I was going to make sure she never laid a hand on my family again. The night Melissa showed up with the knife was the breaking point. The police assured us they would find her, that she couldn't hide forever, but their words did little to calm the pounding in my chest. I had seen her eyes. She wasn't finished not until she dragged all of us into the chaos she carried inside her. For the next few days, the house felt like a prison. Daniel barely slept, pacing by the windows, checking the locks 3 and 4 times. My grandson clung to me everywhere I went, even to the bathroom. He was too young to understand the details, but he knew one thing: his mother had turned into someone he didn't recognize. And me, I felt the fear curdle into something else. Anger, fierce, protective anger. I had let Melissa push me out of my home once. I had watched her lie, cheat, and manipulate until she nearly ruined Daniel's life. But now she had threatened my grandson. That was the final line. She had declared war, and I wasn't about to lose. Richard called that week with an update. The warrant is active. Once she's picked up, she'll be facing charges that carry real time. But, Margaret, until then, you and Daniel need to be on guard. Daniel slammed his fist against the counter. On guard. We can't live like this anymore. She's terrorizing us. Mom. His voice cracked as he looked at me. I can't let her take you down with her. Or him. I reached across the table and gripped his hand. Daniel, listen to me. Melissa feeds on fear. That's her power. But she doesn't get to decide how this ends. We do. That resolve was tested 2 nights later. I was home with my grandson while Daniel worked a late shift. The house was quiet, the boy finally asleep. When I heard a faint scratching at the back door, my breath caught in my throat, slowly. I crept to the kitchen, heart hammering. Through the small window above the sink, I saw her, Melissa. Her face was pale, her hair wild, her eyes glinting with something sharp and dangerous. She had something in her hand again. This time, it wasn't a knife, it was a crowbar. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers, whispering into the receiver, "She's here. She's trying to break in." The operator told me to stay calm, to keep the doors locked, that officers were on their way. But Melissa was already jamming the crowbar into the frame of the door, prying with vicious strength. The wood creaked, splintering. I raced upstairs, scooping my grandson into my arms. He woke, confused and frightened, clinging to my neck. "Grandma, what's happening?" "Shh, baby. It's okay," I whispered, though my voice shook. "I've got you." Downstairs, the door groaned under Melissa's assault. My heart pounded as I shut us into the upstairs bathroom. Locking the door, I could hear her screaming now, her voice echoing through the night. "Daniel, Margaret, you can't keep him from me. He's mine." I held my grandson close, whispering prayers under my breath, until suddenly there was a crash. The back door had given way. Melissa was inside. The sound of her footsteps on the stairs was like thunder. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "Please hurry," I begged the dispatcher. "She's in the house." Then, through the chaos, headlights flashed outside. Sirens wailed. A booming voice shouted from below. Police dropped the weapon. Melissa screamed, a raw animal sound. "No, you don't understand, he's my son." The next moments blurred together. Heavy boots stomped up the stairs. Shouts, commands. The sound of Melissa's cries as officers wrestled her to the ground. The slam of handcuffs clicking shut. And then silence. I cracked open the bathroom door, clutching my grandson. An officer stood in the hallway, breathing hard. "She's in custody. You're safe now." Relief flooded me so quickly my knees nearly buckled. I sank onto the floor, holding my grandson as tears streamed down my poor. Safe, for the first time in months. I could say those words and believe them. Daniel rushed in minutes later. Having driven like a madman when he heard the call, he dropped to his knees beside me, pulling both of us into his arms. "It's over," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Mom, it's finally over." But as much as I wanted to believe that, part of me still trembled. Melissa was gone. Yes, but the scars she left behind weren't going to disappear overnight. My home was destroyed. My grandson's innocence had been fractured. Daniel's trust had been shattered. Yet as I looked into my son's weary eyes, I saw something else. Strength, determination, a man rising from the ashes of heartbreak. Melissa had tried to break us, but in the end, she only made us stronger. That night, as my grandson finally drifted into a peaceful sleep beside me, I sat by the window and whispered to myself, "You lost. Melissa, you can never touch us again." And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace begin to settle in. The war was ending. The storm had passed. But the journey toward healing was only beginning. The morning after Melissa's arrest, the house was unnervingly quiet. Sunlight streamed through the broken window, casting golden streaks across the living room floor. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking to the sound of threats or the weight of fear pressing down on my chest. But the silence didn't feel like emptiness, it felt like freedom. Daniel brewed coffee while I sat at the table, holding my grandson in my lap, his little hands wrapped around his cereal bowl, his eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. "Grandma, is Mommy gone now?" he asked softly. I kissed the top of his head. "Yes, sweetheart, she won't be coming here anymore. You're safe." Safe? The word carried more meaning than I could put into sentences. Safe to sleep without listening for footsteps. Safe to walk into the clinic parking lot without looking over my shoulder. Safe to watch my grandson play outside without fearing a shadow would snatch him away. Richard called later that morning. "Melissa has been denied bail," he said firmly. "She'll remain in custody until her trial. With the evidence we have harassment, arson, violation of the restraining order, and now attempted breaking and entering. There's no doubt she'll serve significant time. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thank you, Richard, for everything. I don't know what we would have done without you. His voice softened. You're stronger than you think. Margaret, you and Daniel both. You've faced down someone determined to destroy you. And you didn't just survive, you endured. That matters. Daniel finally exhaled too. Leaning against the counter, it's really over. Mom, this time, it's really over. But as we looked around the house, the shattered glass, the burned edges of papers she had scattered during her rampage, I knew that while Melissa was gone, the wounds she left behind would take time to heal. That evening, Daniel and I sat outside on the porch while my grandson played in the yard. The air was cool, the cicadas humming softly. For the first time, Daniel let his guard down, his voice quiet but steady. Mom, he said, I feel like I failed. I chose her. I brought her into our lives. And look at the damage she caused. I reached over, taking his hand in mine. No, Daniel, you loved her, and loving someone isn't a failure. What matters is what you do when the truth shows itself. You saw her for who she really was, and you fought back. You protected your son. That's not failure, that's strength. His eyes glistened. I don't know how to start over. You already are, I told him. Every day you get up, make breakfast for your son. Go to work, that's starting over. Life doesn't reset with fireworks and big gestures. It resets in the quiet moments, one step at a time. He nodded, his shoulders finally loosening. Weeks passed, and slowly. The pieces began to fit back together. Insurance helped repair the damage to my apartment. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and kind words, reminding me that even in the darkest storm, community shines through. My grandson laughed more freely, chasing butterflies in the yard, his nightmares fading. And Daniel, my son, began to find himself again. He signed up for evening classes, determined to finish the degree he had abandoned years ago. He even smiled again, though the lines of grief were still etched into his face. One afternoon, as we watched my grandson kick a soccer ball across the yard, Daniel turned to me and said, Mom, I don't think I could have survived this without you. You were the anchor when I was drowning. Tears filled my eyes, but I smiled. That's what mothers are for. But, Daniel, don't forget you pulled yourself out too. You're stronger than you realize. Melissa's trial came and went quickly. With the mountain of evidence against her, there was little room for argument. The judge sentenced her to several years in prison. When the verdict was read, Daniel didn't cheer. He didn't even smile. He just sat quietly. Holding my hand, It's done, he whispered, and I knew he wasn't celebrating. He was mourning the death of what he thought his marriage was supposed to be. But it was also a beginning. Months later, on a crisp fall morning, I stood on the sidelines of my grandson's first soccer game. Daniel stood beside me, cheering loudly as his boy ran down the field, his face lit with joy. For a moment, everything was normal, no shadows lurking at the windows, no threats whispered in the dark, just a family, healing. As I watched my grandson kick the ball, laughter bubbling from him, I realized something important. Melissa may have tried to tear us apart, but in the end, she only made our bond stronger. I had been cast aside, humiliated, and threatened, but I came back. I stood tall. I refused to be broken. And those scars remained. They were no longer just reminders of pain, they were proof of survival, proof of resilience, proof of love that couldn't be destroyed. That night, as I tucked my grandson into bed and kissed his forehead, he looked up at me and whispered, "Grandma, you're my safe place." My heart swelled. After everything, that was the only victory I needed. Melissa had lost, we had won, not with vengeance or bitterness, but with endurance, courage, and love. And as I turned off the light, I finally felt at peace. That was my story. A journey that began with being thrown out of my son's home and ended with protecting him and my grandson from someone who tried to destroy us. I was broken, humiliated, and afraid, but I refused to stay down. I came back stronger, and in the end, love and resilience won over manipulation and rage. If you've ever felt betrayed, if you've ever had someone try to tear you apart, I want you to remember this. You are stronger than the storm, and sometimes Survival itself is the sweetest revenge. Before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And let me know in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to control or break you? I'd love to hear your stories. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself, hold your loved ones close, and remember you are never as powerless as they make you feel.